It was supposed to be a simple family dinner in Dallas. Soft jazz, crystal glasses. My father standing. To toast my brother's future $350,000 to buy his first house. Everyone clapped. And then without missing a beat, he turned to me and said, "You'll cover this month's mortgage, right? Just like that." If you've ever smiled through something that felt deeply unfair, if you've ever been expected to carry what wasn't yours, stay with me. This is the night I stopped staying quiet. Fairness never really had a seat at our table. From the outside, our house in the Dallas suburbs looked balanced. Trimmed lawn, fresh paint, a driveway that always seemed to hold something new and polished. Neighbors waved when they passed. If you didn't look too closely, you'd think we were the kind of family that had everything figured out. Inside, everything revolved around Ryan. I remember the garage most clearly, the smell of oil and cut wood. My father standing beside him, sleeves rolled up, explaining market charts like they were treasure maps. Ryan would lean in nodding, seriously absorbing every word. He was taught how to read numbers before he was old enough to drive. He learned about investments the way other kids learned about cartoons. I was usually nearby, not included. Just nearby. Aubrey, grab us some lemonade, my father would call without looking at me. Or, sweep up when we're done. I became good at staying useful. Quiet hands, quick steps, no interruption. I told myself it didn't bother me, that maybe this was just how families divided roles. Ryan got lessons in confidence. I got lessons in convenience. When he messed up, it was almost charming. If he forgot an assignment or dented something in the garage, Dad would laugh it off. "Boys make mistakes," he'd say, clapping him on the shoulder. Like error was a rite of passage. When I made the same kind of mistake, the air changed. Dad wouldn't yell. He didn't need to. He'd sigh. A long, disappointed breath that felt heavier than shouting. "You need to be more careful," he'd tell me, as if I carried the family's reputation in my hands and might drop it at any second. It was subtle. That's what made it powerful. Mom always nodded along, not cruelly, just automatically. She'd say things like, "It's normal. This is just how families work." And I wanted to believe her. I really did. Because if it was normal, then maybe it didn't hurt as much. I learned to measure love by tone instead of fairness. A soft voice meant approval. A tight one meant I had failed. Silence meant I should adjust. Silence became my habit. At school, the differences followed us. Dad's company sponsored events, and Ryan's name carried weight because of it. Teachers knew him. Coaches knew him. When his name was announced, there was a certain pride attached to it, like he already belonged to something bigger. My name showed up on a different kind of list. Coffee shop shifts, after school hours, weekend coverage. The day Ryan arrived home in a new car, I was standing at the bus stop with my backpack sliding off one shoulder. The car gleamed in the driveway like a reward for existing. Mom stood on the porch, waving proudly as he revved the engine. Balance, she called it. I remember watching them through the living room window some nights when I came home late from work. The house warm, laughter floating out, Ryan telling a story about something Dad had taught him. I'd pause before opening the door, breathing in the scent of espresso still clinging to my clothes, trying to prepare myself for the invisible wall I felt every time I stepped inside. It wasn't hostility. That would have been easier to name. It was absence. When I earned an A on a difficult exam, Dad would glance at the paper and nod. "That's good," he'd say. Then, almost immediately, "But don't get distracted." Distracted from what? From trying too hard, from believing I deserved more. When Ryan landed an internship, there was a barbecue. Actual celebration. Neighbors invited, glasses raised. Dad gave a short speech about ambition and potential. I stayed in the kitchen washing dishes so the table would look clean for the toast. No one asked me to. That's the part that still lingers. I just knew where I belonged. Mom once told me, "You're strong like your father." It wasn't praise. It felt like preparation. Like she was handing me armor and saying, "You'll need this." By the time I reached senior year, Ryan's life looked like a portfolio organized, funded, supported. Mine looked like a spreadsheet of hours worked and bills anticipated. I had started saving small amounts from my part-time job, tucking cash into an old envelope hidden in my drawer. Not for anything specific at first, just escape. Or maybe proof that I could build something without permission. When Ryan graduated, Dad gifted him a watch. Expensive, heavy, the kind that says, "You're already someone." When I graduated, I bought my own dress. I signed my own loan forms, took the city bus to the ceremony because the car was being used for Ryan's job interview. I remember standing in the heat, the band playing families clustered together in the stands. Mine sat in the front row, close enough to see clearly, far enough to feel distant. They clapped when my name was called. Of course they did, but it sounded automatic, like reflex. For the first time, I didn't look for their faces when I stepped off the stage. I looked up at the lights instead. Bright, blinding, impersonal, and I had a quiet thought I'd never allowed before. This moment belongs to me. After graduation, Ryan left for a vacation in Miami, a gift for his hard work. I started my first job 2 days later at a small accounting office in downtown Dallas. My suit was bought on clearance. It didn't quite fit at the shoulders. On my first day, my manager asked why I wanted the job. No one had ever asked me that before. I didn't say anything impressive. I just told him the truth. I wanted to build something on my own. He smiled. "That's a good reason," he said. It was such a small sentence, but it stayed with me longer than any toast or applause ever had. Sitting alone in my tiny apartment that first night, traffic humming outside the window, I realized something I hadn't understood growing up. Independence doesn't come with celebration. It comes quietly. Through every choice you make without being asked. Through every bill you pay yourself. Through every time you decide not to wait for someone else's approval. For years I had learned to shrink, to adjust, to stay useful, to stay silent. But somewhere between the bus rides and the scholarship letters, no one framed something else had been forming too. Not resentment, resolve. Graduation day felt hotter than it should have. The sun pressed down on the field, heavy and bright, the band playing something triumphant that didn't quite reach me. Families filled the front rows. Mine was there too. They clapped when my name was called. Of course they did. But it sounded automatic, polite, like checking off a box. Ryan's friend received an award, and my father leaned forward, clapping with real enthusiasm. When it was my turn to cross the stage, I didn't look at them. I looked at the lights instead, harsh and blinding. For the first time, I let a quiet thought settle in my chest. This moment belongs to me. 2 days later, while Ryan packed for a celebratory trip to Miami, paid for framed, as well deserved, I stepped into a small accounting office in downtown Dallas, wearing a clearance suit that fit just slightly wrong at the shoulders. The building smelled like printer toner and burnt coffee. Nothing glamorous, just steady work and fluorescent lighting. On my first day, the manager asked why I wanted the job. It caught me off guard. No one had ever asked what I wanted before, not in a way that required a real answer. I told him the truth. I wanted to build something on my own. He smiled, simple and genuine. That's a good reason. It was such an ordinary sentence, but it felt like someone had handed me oxygen. That night, sitting alone in my apartment, the smallest one-bedroom I could afford, I listened to the hum of traffic drifting up from the street below. The walls were bare. The carpet smelled faintly of fresh paint. The only table I owned was a folding one I'd found at a thrift store. It wasn't much, but it was mine. Independence didn't arrive with applause. It didn't throw a party. It showed up quietly in the form of rent, due dates and early alarms, in grocery lists, in learning how to stretch a paycheck without panic. I started taking freelance accounting work on the side, small businesses that couldn't afford full-time staff. Every invoice I sent felt like a brick, laid carefully in a foundation no one else had designed for me. The days blurred together. Coffee too strong. Laptop open by the same window every morning. The rhythm of traffic below becoming a kind of metronome for my focus. There was something strange about the silence in that apartment. At first, it felt empty. Then slowly, it began to feel honest. I didn't have to perform there. I didn't have to earn permission to exist. One afternoon, months into that routine, I attended a corporate tax seminar downtown. I almost didn't go. I was tired, behind on sleep. But something pushed me out the door. That's where I met Derek Miller. He was a financial analyst who had recently left his firm after refusing to manipulate client data. We started talking about spreadsheets of all things. Compliance structures, reporting loopholes, the unglamorous parts of finance most people avoid. Then the conversation shifted. I mentioned an idea I'd been sketching quietly for months, a platform that would help young professionals manage their finances and pool small investments to fund early-stage projects. Something fair, transparent, accessible. I had never said it out loud before. Derek leaned forward, eyes focused. That could actually work, he said. No hesitation, no condescension. A week later, we met at a cafe near Main Street. He arrived with diagrams already drawn in a notebook, flowcharts, user pathways, revenue models. We'll call it Fair Fund, he said, tapping the page. Fairness and opportunity, that's the whole point. Hearing the name felt different than just imagining it. It made the idea tangible. That night I registered the domain, drew the first wireframe. My folding table turned into a command center of sticky notes and legal pads. The next few months were relentless. I handled the accounting, logic, compliance research, early outreach to small businesses. Derek built the interface and modeled the investment system. Some nights, we stayed in a shared workspace until dawn, eating takeout and typing between half-finished mugs of coffee. Exhaustion became normal. That's when Dr. Patel called. She had been a friend from university and was now a therapist. She'd seen my late-night messages online and insisted we meet for dinner. "You sound like you're forgetting to breathe," she said gently, after I'd spent 20 minutes explaining projections and timelines. I laughed it off at first, but she didn't. Purpose and burnout often wear the same face, she told me. The sentence lingered long after we parted ways. That night I went home and taped my rent invoice to the wall above my desk. Not as decoration, as reminder. Each month after that, I added another one beside it. A quiet record of survival. One for every month I stayed afloat without asking for help. Fair Fund grew slowly. First 10 users, then 50, then 100. When we crossed 200, Derek and I just stared at the screen in disbelief. Small entrepreneurs began sending messages. "Thank you, I finally launched my project." This made investing feel possible. Each note filled a space in me I hadn't realized was still empty. I stopped checking my phone for missed calls from home. Stopped replaying old conversations in my head. The apartment still echoed when I shut the door at night. But it no longer felt lonely. It felt steady. By the end of the year, we were preparing to present Fair Fund to a group of investors. I stood in the elevator that morning, catching my reflection in the mirrored walls. I didn't see the girl waiting for approval anymore. I saw someone who had built from absence. And the most surprising part, there had been no dramatic announcement, no grand declaration of independence, just discipline, silence, and the decision over and over again to keep going. That spring, Ryan turned 30. The celebration was held in a private dining hall in downtown Dallas, the kind of place draped in white linen and gold light. Chandeliers shimmered overhead. Crystal glasses caught the glow and scattered it across the room. Waiters moved like clockwork, balancing trays of oysters and champagne, as if this night had been rehearsed 100 times. Most of the guests were my father's colleagues, tailored suits, polished smiles, women with diamond bracelets that flashed every time they lifted a glass. The air smelled expensive like citrus wine and quiet competition. I arrived 15 minutes late, holding a small gift wrapped in silver paper, a framed photo of our family from years ago, back when laughter hadn't felt like performance. I hesitated before placing it on the gift table. It disappeared almost immediately behind boxes wrapped in gold and navy ribbon. Watches, monogrammed pens, heavy things. Ryan stood in the center of the room, surrounded by well-wishers. His grin looked practiced, effortless. My mother waved when she saw me, a brief flick of her fingers, as if acknowledging attendance. I took a seat at the far end of the table beside one of the quieter accountants from Dad's firm. He nodded politely and returned to his steak. I smoothed my napkin across my lap and watched the room from a distance that felt familiar. When the cake arrived, candles glowing in perfect symmetry, my father stood and tapped his glass. The room quieted instantly. He began with legacy, hard work, sacrifice. He spoke about ambition as if it were something inherited, something that ran cleanly from father to son. His voice carried easily across the marble floors. Then he smiled at Ryan. "I want to make sure you start this next chapter with stability," he said, pausing just long enough to build anticipation. There was a subtle shift in the room, a leaning forward. "I'm giving you $350,000 to help you buy your first house." Applause broke out sharp and immediate. Someone whistled. Camera flashes flickered across the table. Glasses clinked. Ryan looked down modestly before raising his glass, pretending humility in a way that almost convinced the room. "Guess Dad's proud of me," he said, and laughter rolled easily around him. I stayed still. My hands rested on my napkin, fingers tightening without me realizing it. The fabric wrinkled beneath my grip. I could feel eyes drifting toward me, not openly, but enough, waiting for a smile, a nod, some visible sign of sisterly pride. Instead, I watched the candle flames waver under the flashes of cameras. Small, stubborn lights fighting to stay steady. For a moment, I thought it was over, that the applause would settle, the music would resume, the night would continue its polished rhythm. But my father didn't sit down. He turned his head slowly until his eyes landed on me. His tone softened, almost casual. "Aubrey," he said, "you'll cover this month's mortgage, right?" The words fell into the room like a stone dropped into still water. Conversations died mid-sentence. A waiter froze halfway through pouring wine. Even the music seemed to thin out. Ryan's smile faltered, not from guilt, but surprise. My mother's lips parted slightly as if she might say something. She didn't. I looked down at my plate, at the clean slice I had just cut into the cake. It was such a small, precise thing, and I felt something inside me split just as neatly. I wanted to ask if he was serious, but the answer was already there. In the calm certainty of his voice, in the way he assumed my role without hesitation. The moment stretched. Someone coughed. A glass was set down too loudly. I placed my fork on the plate carefully, folded my napkin once, then again. My chair scraped softly against the marble as I stood. My legs trembled, but my voice didn't. "I think I've celebrated enough," I said. Not angry, not dramatic, just clear. No one tried to stop me. Not Ryan, not my mother, not my father. I walked past the tables, past the chandelier, light past the warmth of the room that had never quite been mine. The doors closed behind me with a muted thud. Outside, Texas rain had started to fall, not gentle, not hesitant. It poured like it wanted to wash the city clean. I didn't open my umbrella. My heels tapped against wet pavement. The air smelled like rain and asphalt and something new. The restaurant windows glowed behind me, full of people who would move on by dessert, who would laugh again, toast again, maybe even mention my name in passing. But the sound faded with each step. By the time I reached my car, my hair clung to my face and my dress felt heavy with rain. I caught my reflection in the rearview mirror, mascara smudged, eyes steady. That night wasn't just my brother's birthday. It was the last time I belonged to their version of family. The year after I walked out into the rain didn't explode into drama. It unfolded, quietly, steadily, like a door closing behind me without a sound. Fair Fund was no longer just an idea running on caffeine and stubborn belief. After months of investor meetings, conference rooms that smelled like polished wood and ambition, we secured full funding. I remember the email confirmation more than the handshake. The subject line was simple. "Approved," Derek called first. He didn't shout. He just exhaled long and slow, like we'd both been holding our breath. For a year. From there, everything accelerated. We expanded into 3 states. What had started as late-night code and compliance spreadsheets turned into a real team. Real salaries. Real responsibility. The office grew louder but not chaotic, purposeful. Whiteboards filled with projections. Conversations about user trust, transparency, growth that didn't compromise integrity. Somewhere in the middle of it all, I was promoted to Chief Financial Officer. The title sounded unfamiliar in my mouth the first time I said it out loud. CFO. It felt heavier than the clearance suit I'd once worn to my first job, but it also felt earned. Not gifted, not announced at a dinner table, built. My calendar filled with board meetings, strategy sessions, and press interviews. My name appeared in articles that used words like visionary, and disciplined. I read them once, then closed the tab. Not because they didn't matter, but because they weren't the point. Success, I realized, didn't feel loud. It felt stable. Around the same time, Alex Reed entered my life in a way that didn't feel like interruption but alignment. He joined Fair Fund shortly after the investment round, closed first, as an advisor offering perspective that was measured and calm. Then, slowly, as something more. He understood silence, not as absence, as choice. When I told him I wanted a home, where mornings began with still water instead of traffic, he didn't laugh at the specificity. He searched listings, sent me links, drove out to properties on weekends with the same thoughtful patience he brought to board meetings. We found it on a quiet stretch of lake just outside the city. $3 million, modern, wide open to the air, glass walls that reflected the sky like it belonged to us. Signing those papers didn't feel like triumph. It felt like arrival. The first morning in that house, sunlight poured through floor to ceiling windows, painting the walls in soft gold. The lake beyond the backyard was still almost impossibly calm. I stood barefoot on the balcony with a mug of coffee and let the quiet settle into my bones. No traffic hum, no echo of old conversations. Inside my office, above the bookshelf, hung a simple frame. Inside, it was a wrinkled piece of paper, my very first rent receipt from the apartment where I had started over. The ink had faded slightly at the edges. The numbers were still clear. Every month, I had taped those receipts to the wall as proof that I could survive on my own, that I could stay, that I could build without applause. Now only the first one remained framed, not as decoration, as reminder. Whenever I looked at it, I remembered the folding table, the too strong coffee, the quiet hum of traffic beneath my window. I remembered the loneliness that slowly turned into strength. That paper was worth more than any title on my business card. My family never reached out after that night. Birthdays passed, holidays arrived and left. Business milestones made headlines. There were no messages, no late-night calls, no attempts to explain or apologize. At first, I expected the silence to ache. I thought guilt might creep in, or longing. That I would wake up one morning and miss the version of belonging I had walked away from. But what replaced it wasn't bitterness, it was stillness. The absence of their voices stopped feeling like rejection and started feeling like space. I no longer checked my phone out of habit. I no longer replayed conversations in my head, trying to rewrite them with sharper lines or braver responses. Some things don't heal because they're fixed. They heal because you stop returning to where you were broken. There were evenings when Alex found me sitting on the patio watching the lake reflect the city skyline in the distance. The lights blinked softly, faint and far away, like they belonged to another version of me. "Do you ever wonder if you did enough?" I asked him once. If walking away was cruel. He didn't answer immediately. He just studied me the way he does when he's choosing his words carefully. "You don't owe anyone proof," he said finally. "You're living it." The simplicity of that settled something inside me that years of approval never had. Fair Fund continued to grow. The office overlooked the city center, now only a few blocks from the apartment I had once lived in. Sometimes I walked past that old building, the faded sign still hanging above the door, the entrance unchanged. I'd pause for a moment, not out of nostalgia, but respect. Beginnings are fragile and powerful. The doorman, who remembered my name once, smiled and said, "You've come far." I smiled back, far enough to feel at home. That was the difference. I wasn't building anymore to prove something. Not to my father, not to Ryan, not even to myself. I was building because it felt right. At home, the air smelled like cedar and coffee. Alex's laughter drifted from the kitchen while music played softly through the speakers. The house wasn't filled with noise. It was filled with choice. And in that quiet, I noticed something unexpected. I wasn't angry. I wasn't waiting. I wasn't rehearsing arguments in my head or imagining future confrontations. The longing I had once carried the hope that someone would finally say, "I see you," had dissolved without ceremony. In its place was peace. Not the kind that erases the past. The kind that no longer asks for its attention. Ryan's collapse didn't happen all at once. It unraveled the way thread slips from a sweater quietly. At first, then all at once when someone pulls too hard. The first sign was a headline buried in a local Dallas Business Journal article about a stalled development project. Then came the rumors. Suppliers, unpaid investors, restless permits delayed. The kind of whispers that float through Dallas networking circles before they ever make it to print. Ryan had always operated on confidence and charm. It had carried him far enough, but confidence doesn't outpace numbers forever. Within months, contracts dissolved. The property he'd leveraged to expand became the weight that dragged everything else under. The house, the one gifted on his 30th birthday in that glittering private dining hall, went into foreclosure. Aubrey didn't learn this from gossip. She learned it from the knock at her gate. It was early evening. The lake was still. The security monitor chimed softly inside the house. She glanced at the screen. Ryan stood outside the wrought iron gate of her lakefront home. No jacket tie loosened the careful polish missing. He looked smaller somehow, like someone had turned down the saturation on his life. Alex looked at her from across the kitchen island but said nothing. Aubrey stepped outside. The Texas air was humid, thick with the promise of rain. The gate opened with a soft mechanical click. Ryan didn't step forward right away. He swallowed. "First, I wouldn't be here if I had other options," he said. She waited. "I just need something short-term," he continued quickly. "Bridge funding, a few months. I can stabilize things." His voice carried the same rhythm it always had, the cadence of a pitch. But underneath it was something frayed. "How much?" she asked evenly. He named a number large enough to tilt a life. She didn't react, not visibly. "I can pay it back," he said. "You know I can." Aubrey studied his face. She saw exhaustion, pride, and beneath that expectation, the old assumption that she would quietly absorb what he couldn't manage. "I'm not going to finance this," she said. There was no edge to her voice, no anger. "Just a fact." Ryan blinked. "You're my sister." "Yes, so you'll let me lose everything." "I'm not taking anything from you," she replied. "I'm just not stepping in." He exhaled sharply. "You have more than you could ever need." She didn't argue the point. She didn't list what it had taken to build it. She didn't mention the nights she'd taped rent receipts to the wall to remind herself why she kept going. "I hope you find a solution," she said. It was the same tone she used in board meetings when a proposal didn't meet risk thresholds. Professional, steady, final. Ryan stared at her like she'd spoken another language. "I thought you were better than this," he muttered. The words might have stung once. They didn't now. She held the gate open long enough for him to understand there would be no second offer. When he left, the sky finally broke. Rain fell across the lake in soft, deliberate lines. Inside, Alex didn't ask for details. "You okay?" he asked instead. "Yes," she said, and she meant it. The viral post came 3 days later. Ryan didn't name her directly, but he didn't have to. He wrote about loyalty, about success changing people, about family being abandoned in times of need. Within hours, screenshots spread across local feeds, comments filled with strangers' judgments. Aubrey saw it because someone from the Fair Fund board forwarded it, asking if she wanted to issue a statement. She read the post once, then she closed the app. Control isn't loud, it's the decision not to respond. Her parents called that night. Her mother cried first. "How could you turn your back on him?" she asked. Her father's voice was colder. "Family helps family." Aubrey listened without interrupting. "The same script, different decade." "I'm not discussing finances," she said calmly. "He's your brother," her father pressed. "And I wish him well," she replied. Silence stretched across the line. They wanted justification, an argument, something to push against. She gave them nothing. After the call ended, she placed her phone face down on the counter. The next morning, she arrived at the Fair Fund office at 7:15 a.m. As usual. She reviewed expansion reports, approved compliance updates, met with the product team about a new budgeting feature for early-stage users. No mention of Ryan, no defense post, no subtweets. At lunch, a colleague hesitated before speaking. "Are you okay?" "Yes," she answered, because she was. The foreclosure finalized within weeks. Ryan's house sold below market value. His company formally dissolved soon after. People expected Aubrey to step in at the last minute. She didn't. Not because she wanted him to fail, but because rescuing him would have required returning to a version of herself. She had already outgrown the useful one, the quiet absorber of consequences. She had learned something different over the years. Discipline builds quietly, so does detachment. At night, when the house was still, she would sometimes walk past the framed first rent receipt in her office. The paper had yellowed slightly at the edges, proof that she had once built from nothing. She didn't feel triumph. She didn't feel revenge. Only steadiness. Ryan had come to her gate believing money was the solution. But what he had really asked for was a restoration of the old dynamic. And that was the one thing she could not give. Control through restraint. Peace through silence. Some stories end with confrontation. Hers continued with work. The ballroom overlooked the water glass walls, reflecting the soft shimmer of evening lights across the lake. Crystal chandeliers hung like constellations above a room filled with investors, nonprofit leaders, and local officials from across Texas. The banner behind the stage read, Fairhome Foundation. Beneath it, in smaller lettering, because stability shouldn't depend on who your parents favor. Aubrey stood near the side entrance with Alex Reed, fingers resting lightly against the edge of her speech cards. The cards were mostly blank. She didn't need them. She had lived the message. The announcement had already circulated in private circles, a $750,000 commitment to launch housing and financial literacy programs for orphans, aging out of the foster system across Texas. Not a vanity project, not a naming opportunity, a structure. At a table near the back of the ballroom sat her parents. Ryan was beside them, posture stiff, jaw set. They had received formal invitations like everyone else. No special treatment. No front row placement. Aubrey had debated whether to send the invitation at all. In the end, she chose transparency over avoidance. When her name was introduced, Chief Financial Officer of Fair Fund and founder of the Fair Home Foundation. The applause rose steady and respectful, not explosive. The kind reserved for credibility earned over time. She walked to the podium in a midnight blue gown expression, composed shoulders, relaxed. She waited until the room settled. When I was younger, she began voice calm, and even I learned that security often depends on who someone believes you are. The audience quieted further. Some people are taught how to build wealth in garages. Others are taught how to stay useful. A few knowing smiles flickered through the crowd. I also learned something else, she continued. Silence can become a habit. You stay quiet. You adjust. You absorb. You tell yourself that fairness is negotiable. Her gaze swept the room, not searching, not avoiding. And then one day she said softly, "You're asked to pay for someone else's mortgage." There was a faint ripple. People remembered the viral post, the whispers, the speculation. She did not name it. She didn't need to. In that moment, she continued, I realized something important. It's not enough to refuse unfairness. You have to build something better in its place. She paused, letting the words settle. The Fair Home Foundation is built on a simple principle. Stability should not depend on favoritism. A roof shouldn't be conditional. Opportunity shouldn't hinge on who receives applause at the dinner table. The room was utterly still. We are committing $750,000 to provide transitional housing, financial education, and long-term planning resources for young adults aging out of foster care across Texas. A screen behind her displayed architectural renderings, clean lines, modest but dignified spaces, community kitchens, study rooms. Fairness, she said, isn't loud. It doesn't shout on social media. It doesn't accuse. It builds. She let that hang in the air. And if you've ever been told to pay a mortgage you didn't sign for, she added gently, you understand the difference between obligation and responsibility. Her parents sat motionless. Her mother's hands were folded tightly in her lap. Her father's expression remained unreadable, but his eyes, I did not leave the stage. Ryan looked down at the program in his hands. I don't believe in revenge, Aubrey finished. I believe in roofs. I believe in balance sheets that protect people instead of expose them. And I believe that silence, when chosen deliberately, is strength. For a breath, the room stayed quiet. Then the applause rose, full, sustained, not polite. Some stood, not because of drama, because of conviction. Aubrey stepped back from the podium and inclined her head slightly, acknowledging the support without soaking in it. As she moved off stage, Alex met her with a small smile, the kind that says, you did exactly what you meant to do. She did not look toward her family. She did not need to measure their reactions. The foundation existed. The funds were committed. The structure was real. Outside, the night air was cool against her skin. The noise of the ballroom faded as the doors closed behind them. Alex offered his arm. She took it. They walked toward the car waiting at the curb, the lake reflecting the lights of the city in long, quiet lines. No confrontation, no dramatic reconciliation. Just a woman who had once been asked to carry someone else's debt, now building roofs for those who had never been offered one, and leaving as always on her own terms. The news of Ryan's bankruptcy arrived the way most things did now, through a brief alert, a headline circulating across local business feeds in Dallas. It was clinical in tone, numbers, liabilities, liquidation. No drama, just paperwork catching up to reality. Aubrey read it once and set her phone down. There was no surge of vindication, no quiet "I told you so," only a steady acknowledgement that consequences like interest accumulate, whether anyone watches or not. A month later, she heard that her parents had downsized. The large suburban house, once the stage for so many unspoken comparisons, was sold. They moved into a smaller place, farther north. Fewer rooms, fewer expectations to maintain. Her mother left a short voicemail one evening. Not accusatory, not apologetic, just tired. "I hope you're well," she said. Aubrey listened. She didn't dissect the tone. She didn't search for hidden meaning. She simply wished them stability and let the silence remain what it was: neutral. Meanwhile, Fair Home expanded. The first transitional property opened quietly in Fort Worth. No spectacle, just keys placed into young hands that had never held anything permanent. Letters began arriving at the office, handwritten notes on lined paper. "Thank you for the desk. I never had my own room before. I feel safe here." Aubrey kept a small stack of them in her study at the lake house. Sometimes she read one at the end of long days when budgets blurred and meetings stretched thin. On quiet evenings, she and Alex sat by the water as the sun lowered itself into stillness. No commentary necessary, just the rhythm of waves against stone. Freedom, she realized, wasn't loud either. It wasn't a declaration or a headline. It was the absence of negotiation inside your own chest. She no longer rehearsed conversations in her mind, no longer imagined alternate childhoods, no longer measured herself against applause given to someone else. Ryan's collapse did not elevate her. Her parents' downsizing did not diminish her. They were simply outcomes. What remained constant was the life she had built, disciplined, intentional, steady. She had once believed silence meant invisibility. Now she understood it differently. Silence was strength when it was chosen. Silence was dignity when it refused to beg. And peace, she discovered, was not something you win. It is something you allow. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is stop performing the version of yourself that keeps everyone else comfortable. You don't owe anyone your silence when it's fear, but when it's chosen, it can be power. If any part of this story felt familiar, I'd love to hear what strength looked like for you. And if stories like this speak to you, stay close. There are more quiet victories to tell.